All right, Austin, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you on here. Literally, when I heard your story, I was like, holy shit, it's me in a dude form. Like, you told it, and I was just like, I mean, literally, I think I had to like pick my jaw up off my steering wheel and be like, oh man, this is me. And I've tried to explain what happened to me to people without like bashing on anybody or anything like that, but just like talk about my feelings, and people just don't get it. And like, to hear you tell your story, I was like, I wish I could convey what happened to me the way you just did. And so I was like, man, this guy's a coach. He knows all sorts of stuff. You were a super smart guy. So I was like, I got to get this guy on my show. So here you are. I'm excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I've definitely told this story several times on some other podcasts, but I think initially that's what got me interested in learning about the whole stress equation and really figuring out like how and why that was so important. I know now so many people talk about stress, like everyone talks about it, right? But I don't know that everyone necessarily knows the ins and outs and intricacies of it other than, hey, lower your stress, right? Which isn't entirely useful. So I think it's cool to see what really happens at a chemical level and at a hormonal level. And commonly this stuff's a lot more towards the female side because males tend to be a little more resilient. So anytime you hear about it with a guy, it's a little bit less common. But it definitely happens. But before we get into that, so just a little bit about myself, I guess. So if any of you guys don't know me, so I am a coach. I know everyone's a coach now, so bear with me. I've been coaching. I don't know. Let's see, it's 2000. It's like 11 years, 11 years about before Instagram. So I think that gives me a little street cred. And so yeah, but now I do. So I coach all kinds of Gen Pop competitors, guys, gals, bodybuilders, powerlifters. But I think in recent years I get probably at least a third of my inquiries are some type of health ailment type of, someone with some kind of issue. Um, do a lot of consults, a lot of things, just from bringing awareness to stuff like this. Like I know you heard me on the Excellence Cartel. They talk about those types of subjects a lot. So that's kind of, I deal with a lot of that side of thing. And I think that now, since competing, I've seen a trend now since they started introducing other classes. When I was first kind of starting coaching, they started introducing like the bikini class, right? And then they started introducing these other female classes. And what we saw was such a large influx in competitors, but also a large influx in the amount of people that were interested in fitness, because I think they saw, like a lot of women saw these other girls, and it was a little more closer to what they wanted to look like, right? Because they didn't necessarily want to look like the female bodybuilder, but they saw bikini and these things and these girls putting stuff on Facebook and Instagram, like, oh, I can do fitness, right? And it was so simplified. I think everything got so simplified down to just like, hey, just track your macros and do your exercise and, be in a calorie deficit and you'll look great, right? And that was kind of where everything started. And I think now we're really seeing, in the last few years, we're seeing a lot of the downstream effect from a lot of these people being so overworked for the, previous 5 years before that or whatever it was, that I kid you not, I think it's probably because I track these types of clients, but I would say 8 out of 10 female clients that I get inquiries from have skewed blood work or skewed lab work and messed up hormones. Like that many, 80% probably. And then males, there's a lot of males too. You'd be surprised. There's quite a few, probably not 80%, but there are a lot. And so like I said, I think we're just seeing that starting to come full circle now, all these people that are just, and it's all stress. It's just total, we'll use the word allostatic load, which just means like total amount of stress over a long period of time, So we're getting, we're getting people that are very busy and they're trying to also train 5 days a week or whatever they do, and then they want to lose fat, so they're adding cardio, and then they're in a calorie deficit, they're doing all these things, and then if they're competing, they're probably competing too often because they're afraid to get fat, and they have body image issues, and then like it ends up just being such a chronic stress load over time that the hole slowly gets dug deeper and deeper and deeper. And unfortunately, I think there wasn't really any type of awareness, like any preventative measures in place. Now it's just like we have to fix everything because no one was monitoring any of that before until it was too late. Does that make sense?
That makes 100% sense. And I think even as a competitor, like I had been down that road before and I had knowledge, like I feel like I immerse myself in everything, any kind of literature, any kind of approach to things. And I knew everything with my last prep was wrong, the way my body was feeling, all these things. But I had this high-end coach that was like, it's no problem. She says, we'll fix it afterwards, blah, blah, blah. Well, afterwards came and there was no fixing it. Like it was a bigger deal than that. It wasn't just a reverse diet and, oh, you're fine now. Nothing of that sort.
Yeah, and I even tell girls that are in good health, like it's stressful to get that lean. It doesn't even matter. Even if we start in a perfect position, females, males for that matter, aren't supposed to be, single digit body fat. That's not a natural thing for our bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you take females, which is even further away from their normal set point of body fat, right? And so it's occurring, all these adaptations are occurring even more and more. But yeah, you can take someone that's in perfect health and they're still going to be down regulated to some extent after the prep. And anytime I work with especially females and same with males, like I tell them, I will require you to work with me after prep for at least some period of time, right? So we can make sure that things are okay. And unfortunately, not everyone wants to do that, or they say they will and then they leave you, or whatever. But it's like, oh no, I'm fine, and you're not fine. I've done lots of shows, and I'm never fine at the end of it. But I also know what I need to do to recover. So again, like even I think that's important to stress is that even someone with low stress, normal hormone function, all these things going into a extreme type of fat loss situation or a large fat loss situation, you're going to have some things that need fixed when you're done, so, and I think that goes for Gen Pot people too, because you're taking people that have large fat loss goals and they lose 50 pounds or whatever it is. Yeah, certain things will improve, like their blood sugar is going to improve, their triglycerides are going to improve, like these markers of metabolic health probably going to improve, but that doesn't mean that their thyroid might not be downregulated, their progesterone might not drop, like those things can still happen. And I just don't think there was a lot of awareness from it. Just like, oh, everyone wants to prep and everyone wants to get in good shape. And then they got done and they're like, well, what do I do now? They start overeating and they're already downregulated. And then all these things start to occur. I think that's why the first fat loss period and first prep for a lot of people are the easiest, because they've got a new goal, their body's fresh, all this stuff, and they get through it and they think, I'm fine. They might not even have any slip ups on food through prep or anything. It all happens after. It all happens afterwards. And when the stress is already all accumulated, you know what I mean? And their goal is gone. And, and they're, like what you wanted to talk about more, like the adrenal insufficiency side of things. So now they have no goal, they're burnt out, they're not having a menstrual cycle because their progesterone's in the tank, their testosterone levels are low, their thyroid levels are low, their leptin levels are low, so they gain body fat back really fast. Their expectation of body image is now ridiculously high, and So mentally and physically, they're shot, so it's a really bad, it's a really bad situation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've seen it happen time and time again, including with myself. I also see others that aren't versed in this scenario going down these crazy ass roads. And you know how it is when you're in prep and you've got this goal, and maybe you're a person that jumps into things both feet and is one of these people that achieves your goals. You do everything your coach tells you. Sometimes that could be detrimental to your long-term health. And so some of these
Yeah.
people put these blinders on and they're totally blind to anything else that is out there. And that blindness, it definitely got me. I did really well at a show. My coach was like, okay, we're going to hammer it hard for 6 weeks and we're going to do everything that we need to do in order to be number one next time. Because I was number two the time before. And I was stupid and I pushed way harder than I should have, and I fried my system hardcore. And looking back, I never noticed. I thought I was
Right.
too fat in the progress
Right.
pictures and things like that. And then my friend showed me a couple weeks later, sent me the pictures she took of me on stage. And I was like, oh my God. My stage shots from the show are the most disgusting. I almost don't even want to post them half the time for anything because I look so disgusting. I lost all my muscle. I had no shoulders left. I was just flat and gross and yucky, and my body felt like it too. It was not good. And I don't ever want to see anyone go down that road. I don't ever want to see it. But you put the blinders on, you don't see those things. And that's why you need a good coach that can say, hey, yeah, you're looking kind of, or you need to back it off a little, or take a rest day, or here, let's give you some more calories, something.
Yeah, it's tough as a coach too, because your business, you want to make money, and you want to help people. But I mean, I lose potential clients sometimes because I tell them those things, and they're like, "Oh, I'll go find someone else." I'm like, all right. I mean, someone's going to take your money, somebody will. But it's a tough situation, and there's a lot of people that they probably shouldn't ever prep at all. And there's some people that if they do prep, it should be very like far and few between type of thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I tell generally it kind of happens like I said, where it's okay the first time, second prep gets a little harder, third prep their body's not respond like, or maybe the second or third prep their body's not responding like the first time type thing. And they have no foundation of like taking time in between shows and this and that. So when they get to me secondhand, if hopefully I get them right off the bat. That's awesome. But if they get to me secondhand, and then one of the first things I tell them is, all right, it's probably going to take us like a year or two to get you back on track. And they're like, whoa, what? A
Mm-hmm.
year or two? And they freak out. And that's just the reality of the situation. And that might be a soft estimate.
Yeah.
you
And,
know?
it sucks as a coach too, because like me, I just want to help people and I want to do it the best way possible. And it's like I had a gal that I had a client call with the other day. I don't think I told her what she wanted to hear. I haven't heard back from her. But I told her blood work. She told me her story of all these yo-yo coaching things she'd done and like the crazy calorie deficits. And then one coach had her on keto with no sodium. Like,
Sure.
what the? Yeah. Anyway, and I was just like, okay, my mind is blown right now. So then I was point blank with her. I said, first of all, I think blood work is imminent in you. You're telling me all these things that I think definitely need to be backed up with blood work. Second of all, I said, her goal is to step on stage. She's never even stepped on stage. She's already wrecked and it's never happened. And she's like, I said, second of all, I don't see you stepping on stage anytime soon. This isn't like okay, in 16 weeks we're stepping on stage here. I said, it may take us year or years in order to get your body healthy to where you might even be able to consider doing this at this point. And
Yep.
she sounded like she needed the help from somebody who actually cared rather than somebody that was going to make a transformation post on their Instagram about how great their coaching is. And I think I probably didn't sell myself very well when I told her it was going to take a long time in order to get there, and that we needed to back it up with blood work and make sure that we go about getting her healthy before we ever start a contest prep. That wasn't a good sales pitch for myself, apparently.
It's not, it's never a good sales pitch, but it's the right, it's the right pitch. It's hard. It's super difficult, especially early on, because I have a few people, probably a handful, like 5 or 6 people right now that do some educational stuff with me. They're like newer coaches, and we talk about all these things. They're like, well, what if they don't want to work with me? I need clients. You know what I mean? It's like, I know it's hard. it's really hard because you want to make money and you want to help people, and you're also frustrated at the same time because somebody else is going to make them even worse. And generally they end up coming back, but then they're worse off than they were already, so you have twice as much work to do. I mean, I get those constantly where I talk about everything, and I might even go as far as to do a call with them and even look at blood work for free, like, do all this stuff. And they like, no, I'm not, they're just not willing to do that mentally. You know what I mean? And then they come back 6 months or a year or whatever later, and they're twice as bad off as they were to begin with. And I tell them, all right, it's probably going to take us God knows how long now, forever. It's going to take us probably 2 years or more to fix all this. And it is really difficult. But beyond that, did you want to talk a little bit more about the more specific, like, adrenal insufficiency part of things?
I would absolutely love that. I mean, it might be best brought into by maybe telling a little bit of your story and what happened to you and what the feelings were and all of that kind of stuff. And then we'll just kind of back that up with what may have led to that and how other people can prevent something like this to happen or best mitigate it. I mean, when you're in this kind of sport, or even, I mean, just a high stress individual in the first place, it's hard, sometimes can be hard to mitigate these things. But I think in the bodybuilding and fitness industry, people think harder is better, go hard, fit it in, don't sleep, who cares? And you think that you're this superhero that can deal with anything, and then you find out afterwards you're not.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And unfortunately, like, it's my advice to people is always do the right things from the beginning and prevent it from happening, but that almost never happens.
Right.
So it's so kind of what happened to me in a nutshell was, and for all the people that live and die by studies and medical terminology, there is no such thing as adrenal fatigue based on the medical community's definition of the word. That's fine, whatever. I still get people that say that. What I'm referring to is what we would call adrenal insufficiency. So by medical standards, this would actually be a disease that causes lack of hormones produced from the adrenal glands, namely like cortisol, right? Adrenaline, things like this. That is an actual disease. I'm not talking about an autoimmune issue. I'm more so talking about a self-induced issue to where we burn out our adrenal function. And essentially how that happens is you demand too much of your adrenal glands for too long. Eventually, they're not going to be able to keep up with demand. They cannot produce sufficient cortisol. And there's other things that go into that too: adrenaline, norepinephrine, like these neurochemicals that kind of like heighten your mood, right? So it's not permanent. The self-induced version of this would not be permanent. Now, the people that have the actual disease, yes, they may require medication. All right. Hydrocortisone is used a lot of the time to help reduce cortisol. Now, For my situation, it was just chronic stress for a long period of time. That's literally what it is. Now, when we look at stress, and this is kind of what I like to tell people is think of it as like a pie chart. You have like a certain amount of stress that you can allocate towards everything in your life. So on your pie chart, you have a section for training, a section for your work, or section for relationships, section for like sleep, right? A section for whatever other emotional or psychological stress you have, right? So you think like how much of each of those things takes up of your total 100% that you have, okay? And that's the easiest way to think about it is if you are utilizing more than your total stress, capacity, I guess if you want to call it that, you're eventually going to run into problems because you're going to be in too much of a sympathetic state. So sympathetic being your nervous system being heightened, right? Fight or flight. Um, if you're in that state for too long, your body will, for at first, your body is just going to produce more of these adrenal hormones to keep up. It's going to produce more cortisol, more cortisol. And that's generally what people hear. Like they think of cortisol when they think of stress, they think of high cortisol, which a lot of the time that's the case. It's just how long has it been like that? You know what I mean? Because eventually your body won't be able to keep up with the demand. And that's when we start seeing that high, and then it drops off. And that's just, like I said, that's just because adrenal functions basically tanked. You can't keep up with demand anymore. And you've damaged your adrenal glands. All right. So that's where I ended up. Now, the funny thing about the story was that I was doing a lot of things right. And this is what gets people a lot of the time because this is like such it's not a very black and white concept. So explaining it to a client is hard where I was only training 4 days a week. Now they were high intensity, but I was sleeping 7-8 hours a night. My place of work was literally like right behind the place that I trained and worked at. So it wasn't like anything, my schedule was very regimented, I slept, my nutrition was great. I wasn't in a like extreme fat loss phase and using a bunch of stimulants or anything like that. So you might ask like, well, how the heck did that happen? Well, my workload was really, really high and my business was growing and growing and growing. And most of my stress was derived from psychological stress. Now, like my perception towards stress and handling stuff was just not good, essentially. So that's like something that's not tangible that people they can't measure it very well. You know what I mean? So I don't think a lot of people catch that. And that's the kind of stuff I try to ask about in updates when I suspect people are stressed. And it's such a hard thing to grasp because you get so used to just your personality and the way that you act and react that you don't realize that you're doing it. It's just how you are. It's a habitual thing. It's a habitual thing. You do it. It could be certain stuff every day. Like every morning you go to work, you get stuck in traffic. You're really pissed off by the time you get to work. There's people that you don't want to see. So you get anxiety before they come in. Maybe it's your boss or coworker or whatever. Like all these little events that happen all the time. And it's every single time it happens, it's more cortisol, more cortisol, more cortisol. Like it's just dumping it, every time your adrenal glands have to respond over and over and over. And at some point, they're not going to be able to keep up. So the question's always like, well, we'll go into that next. We'll say in my situation, that's essentially what happened is it was just mostly like emotional stressors, right? I suspected something was wrong because I was doing all these things right, but I just felt terrible. So at the time, I'm really lucky to have an awesome doctor. And he suggested a test to me, which I'm sure you've heard us talk about, like the Dutch test. It's a urine test. I was one of like the first people in his office to get it. He had the sample in there. It was a brand new thing. You know, these like reps had come in and given him this test that was brand new at the time. And now, you know, now it's like people are learning more about it. But this was probably like 6 or 7 years ago. He gave it to me and he said, I want you to use this test. And he told me what it was. And essentially, for people who don't know, it's a urine test. You take samples at different points during the day. It will show you patterns, you know, throughout the day of adrenal hormones, of other hormones. It also measures some neurotransmitters and various things. For women, it'll measure progesterone and different cyclical hormones. But anyhow, I took this test, and sure enough, my cortisol was zero, like, or very close to zero, pretty much all day long. And I had my neurotransmitters, like the metabolites that would come out in my urine, were very low. So my dopamine was very low. My norepinephrine was very low. So basically, I'm just like flat all the time. No, nothing. Like we talked about before the show, described it as you could stand out in front of a truck on the freeway and you wouldn't care if it hit you, type of thing. You're like,
Yeah.
you know, big deal.
Been there. Like, where you feel like I mean, to some point where you were like, I feel like I'm such an asshole because I just really don't care. Like, people would be telling you their story, or like your family like expects some kind of sympathy from you, or who knows what it is, and you're just kind of like, yeah, yeah, sure, whatever. You just no depression or lows, no highs, just like flat.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's just complete and utter lack of any type of arousal towards anything. You know, and you can't even get pumped up. You can't get pumped up to train. You can't get pumped up to do anything. You can, you could go down, you could drop off of a like base jump off of a cliff and your adrenaline wouldn't even go up, type of thing. You know what I mean? Because your body just doesn't have the resources. So that's kind of where I ended up. Now, in a medical sense, there's for extreme adrenal insufficiency, you can actually go into what they call an adrenal crisis if you bottom completely out and you have zero cortisol. So these people with medical disorders that cause this, you know, very low cortisol, they can have these crises and they can end up needing to go to the hospital and essentially receive a injection of hormones so they don't die. You know, it's like there's a lot of hormones that you can live without, but this isn't one of them. You know what I mean? So if you bottom completely out and you go zero cortisol, you will be dead. And so it's Addison's disease is the disease that I'm referring to, which it's not very common. It's not like most people that I run into. I've never actually ran into anyone with Addison's disease. They've always just had like this what we would call like secondary adrenal insufficiency, which is just the self-induced, you know, stress like I talked about. And I frankly don't run into a ton of people with adrenal insufficiency. I would say like probably 1 out of every 10 people that have extreme stress get bad enough to where they drop off. You know what I mean? Most of the people run into just a like very high cortisol. But again, the issues kind of still will cause a lot of the same downstream effects to other hormones. They still, there are some like secondary things that you could, like if you have adrenal insufficiency, you can have issues with low blood pressure, you can have issues with low blood sugars and things like this. In the opposite, for high cortisol, you may end up with heightened blood sugars, you know, you may end up with high blood pressure, all this stuff. But kind of the other downstream effects that we were talking about earlier with women, especially, and hormones, is, you know, loss of menstrual cycles. So amenorrhea, there's different ways that happens, but usually the most common one is cortisol goes up, that steals progesterone production because it's all coming from adrenal glands. And then they end up with lack of progesterone, which doesn't allow them to have a proper cycle. They don't ovulate. They generally will end up with, most of the time, high estrogen. So you end up with what they call estrogen dominance. So it's like the ratio flips, and that's more or less what you see most of the time in women. In men, it would be, in men generally just like low testosterone levels. Their test levels will go down. They just feel like libido's shitty. Their training's shitty. They maybe don't look like, their physique starts to kind of look mushy and just like they're not partitioning nutrients very well. They're very inflamed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
and correct me if I'm wrong, when testosterone goes down, does estrogen come up?
so in men, normally not. So for women, most of your hormone production is ovarian or adrenal glands. Those are the two main places. As you get older and you go through menopause, your adrenal glands kind of pick up some of the slack. Now in men, it's mostly from their testes, but for women, you directly produce estrogen, whereas men, they aromatize testosterone into estrogen. So you have an enzyme called aromatase, and then what you'll have there is generally lower estrogen levels, actually, because they'll have less test, so they have less aromatization to estrogen, and they'll have low testosterone and low estrogen at the same time. But men you don't want low estrogen as a male either. You need estrogen. It helps with libido. It helps with actually nutrient partitioning. It helps with muscle growth. There's a lot of benefits to estrogen in men as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just a female hormone.
And
but
sorry to interrupt you there, Austin, but that's one thing that I think is a common misnomer amongst a lot of people, is they think that testosterone is bad in women and estrogen is bad in men, but they all hold hands together here. They all are needed to function as a whole in males and females.
Yeah. You don't want any disruption in your endocrine system. There's like your endocrine system and all your body systems are super smart. Like, they're really good at regulating things, and they have secondary mechanisms that will help balance stuff out for a while, like compensatory. Like if you're stressed out and you have otherwise good health, you can handle being stressed out for a couple days, or even maybe like having a bad week, right? But if you're really already screwed up, like, we'll take these people that are already screwed up and they want to do a contest prep, they're going to have problems, right? These people that are really, really healthy and have normal adrenal function and normal endocrine system, they can be okay absorbing some of that stress for a little while, right? Now, yeah, I mean, you don't really want to manipulate anything. And there are, like, when we're fixing issues like this, it's good to have, like, there's certain supplementation and things that we're going to do. Namely, like in females, trying to raise progesterone back up, that drops. Certain things like chasteberry is a common one that people will use because it will help produce luteinizing hormones, so that'll help produce progesterone. Some women might need progesterone, like in cream form, or maybe even oral micronized progesterone, depending on what kind of issue they have. Because women, it can get really bad to the point where they start developing like PCOS, right? PCOS can be genetic, but there's a lot of literature that would suggest, and if you talk to a doctor about this and you said that I have PCOS because I'm stressed out, they might kind of laugh at you, but it definitely can be a downstream effect if you are in a bad enough spot where the women can potentially develop this PCOS. And then, with PCOS, you're going to end up with other issues. Low progesterone is one of them, but your androgens can get skewed. You also end up with insulin resistance. Anytime, you have a cyst on your ovary, it's not good. It can disrupt things, right? So, yeah, there's a lot of downstream effects, and like I said, there are supplements and things that can help, but every single one of these things always goes back to stress. It's like any type of endocrine disruption, unless you have like a tumor on your, like a benign tumor or something that's causing like disruption. There's always the stress component. And that's why it makes it so hard to fix, because it's not something you can see. It's not a supplement you can take. It's not anything. It's invisible. Not only is it invisible, but it's a lot of the time it's self-created. You know what I mean? So it's, I don't want to use the word. I try to think of like examples to give people. Like I mentioned the example of the pie chart. Like I try to illustrate it to people and show them. Another thing that I'll do sometimes is we'll do like journaling can work good. And by journaling, it doesn't have to be anything. Some people aren't really into like the really like philosophical or like very, that's not everyone's jam, and that's fine. Like if I tell some hardcore dude to journal to fix his stress, it's like, what? No. So I'll simplify it, and we can even, depending on my audience, right, is let's just make tally marks. I said, make a tally mark every time you get pissed off in the day. And I said, all right, well, let's start reducing the tally marks. Now, if you had 150 tally marks this week, let's try to get 125 next week, right? Let's try to start reacting better to things, because it's like a running joke to people that Mom, I hate my work. I don't sleep. Life sucks. Like the joke, like it's a joke, right? But all these things are just stress, and they're more stress. They're like, oh, I'm so tired. I drank 3 Bang energy drinks today. I had 1,500 milligrams caffeine yesterday. It's like, but really, that's your body's telling you, hello, like something's wrong. So these are, we'll call it like the low hanging fruit. You know what I mean? Like, what are the little things that we can start improving to fix the total stress load?
Yeah. Yeah. And so like, say somebody suspects they may be headed down this trail. Obviously you just said a red flag right here. You're starting to feel tired, maybe when you shouldn't. What are some other things people can take into consideration if they think maybe something could be going on, or other red flags?
So I had a girl this morning, this client of mine, and this, I think she'd be a good example. I won't mention her name and throw her under the bus, but she's actually in like a fat loss phase, and she's making good progress. She's losing fat, but her energy levels and her just mood and overall kind of like demeanor towards things is not, it's going down the drain. And she's acknowledging it. She's like, I should not be this tired. You know what I mean? And for her, it's her work. Her work schedule's insane. All right. So luckily she's giving me good feedback, and I can actually see that there's something going on. That's number one, is people just don't give good feedback because they think it's their normal, right? But so most people look at this situation and they're like, well, how can I even fix this? Because I can't change my work schedule necessarily. Like, how do I fix it? So we had to make a call to start reducing things from other sources. So this might sound so strange, but I only have her training 3 days a week. And I only have her doing low intensity cardio, like nothing, no hit cardio, nothing like that. I reduced her meals down to 3 per day. Why? Because it's one less thing she has to think about during the day.
You think, I not to interrupt you, I'm sorry, Austin, but do you think that digestive stress could also be a factor in this? Like when people are eating so many meals that their digestive system is constantly under strain?
Yeah, I'm a good example of that right now. because I'm eating a lot of food. And I talked about this on a different podcast. But it can happen. I mean, like normally in women, it's not as much of an issue because generally they just don't need tons. Like I don't really have any women that need to eat 5,000 calories. You know, you occasionally get an anomaly in there that is now eat like 4,000 plus calories. It's not that common. Now in men, it probably happens more often, but I'd say normally though, the GI issues that I see are a lot of the time secondary to stress. You know, it's kind of like anytime I see GI issues and stress in conjunction, I'm normally going to ask, I need to figure out which caused which type of thing. You know what I mean? But a lot of the time, it's unless they're eating some foods that they're intolerant to, or you will get situations where they're eating, like I do get girls that they get low food if they're doing a macro plan. They start getting greedy with like eating, 70 grams of fiber a day or something stupid, and their gut is wrecked. Like stuff like that can happen. And anyone that has, like, when you have an upset stomach, you're normally not in a very good mood.
Yeah.
It's
But
because go ahead.
Yeah, so mostly though you're reducing meals just so they're not like, oh, I got to get this meal in. Meal in.
It's in her case, it's just for convenience, right? It's just one less. She's not eating so much food that she has to eat 5 or 6 meals a day to be able to, get them down. So it's just convenient. Like all I'm doing with her plan is I'm making it literally as convenient as possible. And the more convenient that we can make it while still meeting her caloric needs and her to lose fat, the better off she's going to progress. So, and like my instruction was literally, we went from 4 days to 3 days a week. I said, I want you to, on that 4th day when you normally train, I don't want you to pick up more work. I want you to take a nap or do something relaxing. Don't like replace one stress, with another stress.
Right.
So and I'm not going to take her, like I realistically, I'm not going to take her down to not training at all. But I run into people like that I can't even, like we're not even going to be able to do any type of workout. It's going to be super low impact at first because you are so wrecked that any type of stress is just, they can't recover. They hold a shitload of water. They get really inflamed. They feel exhausted for, 2 days after they do a workout. If you're really bad off, you'll feel that. You can't do anything.
And you just described me when I was having major problems, and that was the crazy thing that I couldn't wrap my head around, is like, I train really well, and I backed off my training, and I was like, I'm training only 3 days a week. I'm making the most of that, blah, blah, blah. I dropped my cardio, food's up, I'm fat. I should be doing well, right? But it wasn't. The more I trained, the worse I looked. I, got that sub-Q water everywhere. I can't recover, all of the things you just described. And to me, I was not willing to give up the lifting. It was this thing that I was stuck in. And even when on little tiny lifting days, my body would hurt for 5 days, and it was ridiculous. And so it took a long time to dial that in with myself. And I'm sure there's other people out there. They're like, oh no, I just had an epic leg day and my legs were sore for 5 days. No big deal. And it's like, no, maybe your body's telling you something if you're not recovering.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's so many little cues in there that you have to kind of, I'll admit, I don't ever fault anyone if they're having those types of issues. I still think people they're not that knowledgeable about it. And why should they be? It's not their profession. That's not what they do. You know what I mean? I wouldn't ever expect a new client coming to me to know what adrenal insufficiency is and all these hormone dysfunctions, because that's not, they work at a bank or whatever, you know what I mean? That's not what they do. But I think it's important to learn the skill of biofeedback and learning, watching things and listening to things. It's no coincidence that my clients that recover and regulate things the best and have the least amount of setbacks and, and issues, they're good at giving feedback. they're just intuitive. They watch things, they pay attention, so on and so forth. But yeah, it's if you look at, so we were talking about like the Addison's disease, for example. If you look at people in that community, a lot of the time their recommendation is no weight training for a lot of those people, because they can't have any sympathetic drive towards anything. They just they won't recover. So yeah, if it's a bad enough situation, we're gonna back it way down. Like if you listen to when I told my story on the other one, I didn't do anything. I didn't train to failure at all for like 6 months. No sets to failure at all, and I reduced my total amount of volume and everything way down. And it's funny because I got stronger. About 2 months in, I started getting stronger, and I was not even going close to failure. I'm like, holy shit, I'm getting stronger. And because I was recovering. But yeah, it kind of just depends on the severity of it, like how extreme it's going to be. But yeah, I think a good takeaway message for all, like, trying to fix those types of things is always figure out where your gaps are, like what's causing you the most amount of stress, and see if you can work on that first, and pick up those low-hanging fruit, like things that you can improve. I had a client this morning, she sent me a message and she said she was like, I had sent her a podcast that we did about light exposure and regulating your circadian patterns and things, and she started doing it, and she's like, holy crap, I can't believe how much better and deeper I'm sleeping. And all that she's doing now is, everyone talks about like blocking blue light and stuff at night, wearing your blue light blockers and all of this, but you also need some sunlight like into your eyes and stuff during the day and in the mornings. I know one of the very first things I did recovery was I was reading some real hippie like article about sun, and I still do this to this day. Is I open my blinds, I try to get light just into my eyes and stuff first thing in the morning, and because I don't go outside very much, so either do that or do my little, like, one of those I have a little sun lamp thing on my desk, that shines in. But yeah, just regulating your circadian patterns as a whole is really what adrenal function is all about. You need to sleep well. You need to have a routine. Routine is always your friend. Trying to get up and go to bed around the same time as much as possible. Having the right sleep hygiene, that's like a whole nother podcast. If you work night shifts, we did a whole podcast on night shifts recently that was super popular. You can check that out. Night shifts are horrendous for you. That's a great way to screw up your adrenal function. I wouldn't even want to take the extra money for night shifts. There's no way. It's not worth it.
Yeah, I mean, there's even science. Well, we know how science is, but there is science that backs up. When the time change happens in daylight savings, there's more heart attacks and things like that because it puts people's systems under so much stress.
1 hour. That's 1 hour.
Yeah, crazy, huh?
1 hour.
Yeah.
People don't have any awareness. Like I said, I think that kind of what I said earlier is people just don't have any awareness of these types of things because I call it like the subjective well-being, they're just used to feeling a certain way. So that's kind of the term that I use. And it's just, you just get used to it. You don't think anything of it. You power through it. Why? Because most of the people that we deal with and clients, they're highly motivated people that are going to get shit done, regardless of if they have 1 foot in the grave, they're still going to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And that is a great personality trait to have, but it's also a really dangerous one. And you just have to learn when less is more and better. I always say that more is better until it's not.
Right. Absolutely. That's a great one. Yeah, I love that. And I know we're kind of starting to get a little pressed for time here, so I'm going to open up a new can of worms.
Go for it.
So right now, heart rate variability is a big buzzword. How do you feel about that? Do you think that it's a great tool to bring into your training if you're somebody that has a tendency to overdo it? Because I know with us doers and the people, like you said, that are able to comply to things and they do it and then more is more. Sometimes we feel like if we're like, I'm tired, maybe I shouldn't train today, or I'm feeling a little run down, or things are a little too stressful right now, we're like, nah, it's just our brain telling us we're being a pansy. We're going to go do it anyway. So sometimes it's great to have some real hard data on, am I actually feeling this way, or am I actually being a Sally? How do you feel about that as used as a tool to help decide what days you should be training, or how you're feeling, or if your feelings are valid?
Yeah, so there's a couple good types of feedback like that. Heart rate variabilities work. Even just tracking your heart rate can be one way. If we see like resting heart rates in the mornings going up and up and up, a lot of the time that's an indicator of higher cortisol in the morning, like a higher waking response. That's normally stress. HRV is a little bit more intricate than that because you're looking at the actual variability between your heart rate. But this is what I always say about feedback is I always try to, because I have like with the client, they'll get instructions that say, this is what I want in your updates, each section. Some people, I do less feedback because they're way too over analytical, and getting them more stuff is actually way worse than other people, like the people that are very, very unaware of things and just kind of very nonchalant, and they can be really screwed up and not know it. I would use that tool. Why? Because it gives them something that they can look at, and it might just be a matter of me getting them to acknowledge it. Like, look, I've been telling you this. Now look at this number that we have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or it's the same thing with blood work. Sometimes people are like, no, I'm fine. I'm like, no, you're not. I'm looking at the updates. You're not, your body's not responding. We'll get
Mm-hmm.
lab work done. And I like, see, do you
Mm-hmm.
see this? I'll circle it, whatever, so for the right people, I think that stuff is great. For the wrong people, like people that are already very over analytical, it could be a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be surprised. You think data is really good unless it's in the wrong hands. Like I'll get these inquiries. I can tell on an inquiry. I'll get an inquiry and someone will send me like 10 pages of shit. I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell you right off the bat that this person's stressed out. They're sending me, they're checking their blood glucose like 4 times a day, and they're, and
Hey,
they're
whoa.
just, well, there can be situations, but I mean, inevitably, some people, I'm not going to give them extra stuff to do.
Right.
I want them to get better at just listening to their body and actually feeling things. So yes and no. I know there's people that like live and die by that feedback, and that's a really bad thing too, because you're just going to stress yourself out more.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, minimalizing the amount of stuff that they need to think about is so helpful. I want them to not think about anything and just do it, and I want me to think about everything. So I'll just I give them just the right amount of stuff to pay attention to and then tell me, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can be anything, like, and that applies to a lot of stuff. Like that applies to people that, like women that in the off season, they get too focused on their weight. Well, maybe I
Mm-hmm.
won't have them track their weight as much. Or I have someone she doesn't track her weight at all right now. And I just look at photos, and that works really good. It's funny because I'll do stuff like that and I'll take things away, and all of a sudden they start improving. It's because they were hyper focused on just like bullshit stuff that just stressed them out all the time,
Mm-hmm.
So that is a great question. It kind of just depends on the personality of the person. More stuff to look at can be good and also really bad at the same time.
Right, right. It's funny because I kind of the same thing. I stopped with one of my clients doing even progress photos, except for once a month, and weight, because she was obsessing about it. And she has ulcerative colitis. She's a national level competitor in the NPC, has ulcerative colitis, and she was so focused on that instead of helping her digestion out so she could succeed in other places. She was more focused about her weight than anything. And I was like, whoa, hold on just a second. We're not worried about weight right now. We have others. Let's get you healthy, get your digestion good. And we had everything going really well. And then her doctor put her on some supplement that started sending her digestion over the top again after it had been amazing for months and months and months. And so it was kind of then the weight gain started coming back, and it was this downhill spiral of, oh no, my weight came up. I was like, you're not supposed to be weighing yourself right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just do it like when it's relevant, you can use it. When it's helpful, you can use it. It's funny because I have clients that have been with me for a long time, and they're so good at updating. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they'll even put, like, I'll have a spreadsheet or whatever for them. They'll even just put NA in one of the sections where they're like, oh, it's like, it's not relevant to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they inevitably make good progress week to week. Nothing, people don't realize, like, nothing changes, nothing major will change in a short term. There are, like, pieces of short term feedback that matter, and there are other things short term that shouldn't matter that much, like weight, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, day to day weight might not mean jack shit, especially in a female that has. You take a female that has a menstrual cycle, digestive issues, and they're stressed, their weight is like going to be, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
go all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
They might fluctuate. I have a girl that fluctuates. Before we got her body under control, she was fluctuating 10 pounds or more in a week, which tell any woman they're going to fluctuate 10 pounds in a week, that's only like a 130-pound girl, they're going
Mm-hmm.
to freak out.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
So,
Well, we're a little towards the end of this here. If people love what you're talking about and what you're all about, how do they find you? Social media, what's best for them to get in contact with you?
yes, so they can. So on my Instagram and my Facebook, I have in my bio, I have a link tree that has, if you just click on it, it'll have a links to my YouTube channel and, like, my podcasts and my website and all that stuff. So it's all in one spot. So you can, if you just look up Austin Stout on Facebook, I'll be on. It's a stage photo, so you'll see the tan bodybuilder guy on stage. You'll find me, and my company's Integrated Muscle and Health, so you'll see it in my bio. You'll see it listed on there. Instagram is Austin ST8, the number 8, and yeah, just check out the link tree. It's all in there.
Then they can see you in your barn gym doing your
Oh God,
pajama workouts and
dude,
killing it.
I am a I'm a fucking dungeon. Like, I just live in a hole. Yeah, all the time.
I dig it. Hey, you know what? If that reduces your stress level and it makes you feel good, that's all that matters, right?
Yeah, we just get it done.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Austin. I wish we had more time because you are a huge knowledge base for all sorts of things. And so maybe someday we'll get you back on here.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Have an awesome day.
You too.